Hi, everyone. Welcome to season 2 of Mom Autism Money. This is our very first episode. And today we are talking to you guys just a few days actually before Autism Acceptance Month starts here in April.
I don't really do anything. I just go for the deals.
Nice. Tell us about that. I don't know about the deals.
Like, movies will be like $3 on Sundays, autistic friendly, like lower sound, lights on, bring your own food. We're game. You know what I mean? It's like
Nice.
events like that. But that's what we used to do. Like, I don't do any other thing. I just go and look for deals. Like when it's sent a deal, like bowling on a Saturday, to celebrate autism awareness, and it's cheap. I'm there.
That's
That's
awesome. I actually did not know about the deals. That's not
mhm,
something that I'm very tuned into, I guess. I'm gonna have to keep
mhm,
an eye out for
mhm.
that.
Oh yeah, but yeah, I just it's interesting to hear other people's perspective. So I guess this is a good episode to have.
Absolutely. And I feel like for me, what I see more for Autism Acceptance Month is a lot of like online fundraisers, like people raising money for different
Mhm.
organizations. And that's where I see like a lot more of the financial stuff. But again, I'm going to have to look into the deals. But we sat down with Lei Wiley-Mydskey, and she is an autistic and otherwise neurodivergent and disabled gender vague writer, artist, advocate, and activist. Lei is the community outreach coordinator for Autistic Women and Non-Binary Network. She's also the founder and director of the Neurodiversity Library in Washington State, and you can visit that at neurodiversitylibrary.org. And they are also the creator of the Neurodivergent Narwhals, which is a really cute, just educational cartoon series. So, Lei is going to talk to us a little bit today about two different concepts and some of the organizations that you'll find within those kind of conceptual ways to celebrate this month. The first is autism awareness, and the second one is autism acceptance. And you'll see people refer to it both ways. I mean, Lei kind of breaks down where those terms come from and kind of what they're associated with. So as you're seeing those fundraisers, you can kind of pick for yourself which ones you want to engage with. And also look out for the deals. That's a really hot tip, Joyce.
Mhm, mhm. Also, I do recommend that if you're looking for charities, always start local. Always. If you're like for us, it will be make sense to the respite program that my boys are in to donate to them too because they do an amazing work, not just for my kid, but the whole entire community. You can edit.
Definitely. We have some really good advocacy groups out here in Pittsburgh too. So yeah, a lot of these larger organizations do have smaller local chapters if you want to look into them too. All right, let's turn things over to Lei. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mom Autism Money. Today, we have a very special episode ahead of Autism Acceptance Month, where we're going to be talking a little bit about some of the terminology you might hear these next couple weeks, and also how to work with it in the most positive way for your child. And today, we're going to be interviewing Lei. And Lei, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm wondering if you might want to tell us a little bit about yourself and the library you have and how all of that came to be.
Well, I'm Lei Wiley-Mydskey. I'm an autistic adult. I'm a parent of an autistic teenager. And together, when they were much younger, we founded the library, the Wiley Autism Acceptance Library, because we went to our local community library to find books about autism, and there were only 3. And none of them were, well, one was written by an autistic person, but it was directed to parents, and the other 2 were written by professionals. And I knew that there was so much information from autistic people that needed to be shared with the community. So we started our own library. We collaborate with our local community resource center, and we were setting up twice a month before COVID. And since COVID has happened, we just stopped doing that. We did appointment only, where I would like leave things. I would either mail them to people or leave them, like no contact pickup. But we recently started having monthly meetings again. We do what I call community conversations, and we have different people from our community come and talk about just topics that I think are important, not just to disability justice or neurodiversity, but just things that are important to our community. Like we've had talks about equity and diversity, and we've had people from our local PFLAG come out and talk. I'm really happy with how it's going. And when we do that, we bring all of our libraries so people can borrow books. That's what we do. And I'm also the community outreach coordinator for Autistic Women and Non-Binary Network, and I do a lot of writing. And so that's kind of how the library came to be.
That's awesome. That's awesome. We were just very honored that you guys are here joining us and educating us. And we love the Autistic Women and Non-Binary Network too. You guys have a lot of great resources. Now we're here today to talk about autism acceptance versus autism awareness. I guess let's start with the awareness part.
If we're talking about awareness versus acceptance, I think awareness, I don't think it's the intentions of awareness for parents, at least, is bad. But a lot of times organizations raise awareness in ways that are harmful to autistic people. And they're actually, I think, harmful to parents too, because they damage the relationship that you have with your children. So I don't think there's anything wrong with being aware, but when it's framed as something negative, some of the campaigns that I've seen, with numbers of like this percentage of people is going to be autistic and it's a bad, terrible thing. And it just creates stigma. It kind of is telling the world that this is something to be afraid of rather than something that's natural. And that's just, people are different and we're always going to be here and we've always been here. When you're talking about it in ways that say that the way that I am, like being autistic or the way that my child is a problem, then it's of course going to create stigma and it's make us feel like bad about who we are. I feel like it's based a lot on fear of autism and disability. I think that takes up the most space in the world of autism advocacy is awareness versus acceptance, but I do see that is changing a little bit in the past few years. So I feel when we talk about, it's kind of like when you see those I am autism campaigns and it says, like I'm lurking in the shadows and I'm going to steal your child. that absolutely is harmful to autistic people. And it's harmful to our relationships with our families and our communities. And I think that the majority of parents of autistic kids, they want to do the right thing. And I think that they love their children and they don't want to harm them. But organizations such as Autism Speaks that are focused on things like cures and parent support over the rights of children and disabled people are always going to be problematic. And even with Autism Speaks, very little of what they do actually goes back to the autistic community. And very little of the money they raise actually goes back to the communities that raise it. So they have really good marketing and they make you feel a certain way about autism. And they frame being an autism mom or autism dad as like you're a special kind of person for raising an autistic child. And it kind of, it's problematic. I think the reason for that is kind of a combination of ableism and childism. Because we don't treat children or disabled people very well in society. We kind of treat disability and children as like things that are being done on purpose to people around them instead of just the natural states of existing in the world. In the case of children, you obviously eventually grow up that an autistic person is always going to be autistic. And I think an example of that is it's acceptable you see people all the time saying they hate children. And you couldn't really say that about another group of people. And there's like debates about whether or not it's okay to hit kids. That's like a big factor. It's not just ableism, it's also the way we treat children. I'm sure Autism Speaks doesn't think that they treat autistic people badly, but they don't do disability rights work or disability justice work, and they are not trying to shut down institutions. They're not concerned about guardianships or anything that have to do with like our fundamental rights as human beings. I think they make your job harder as a parent because they're telling the world that your life sucks and parenting your child sucks because they're autistic. And they're telling the world that even when your family struggles to love you if you're autistic, but your family does struggle to love you if you're autistic, like what is that telling the world about the value of your child's life? If you can't even love your child without like so much effort, like what is that telling the world? So I think they do harm to autistic people, but the biggest thing for me as a parent is the harm that they do to our relationships with our children.
Are there other organizations that parents should maybe, if they encounter them, maybe pivot somewhere else?
I think that with any organization, you need to like really think critically about it. So if it's an organization that's not concerned with disability justice, I don't think it's a good organization. if they are focusing on cures and preventions and changing your child, then they're not the type of organization I'd support. And I think any disability organization where the majority of board or decision makers are non-autistic people, and I wouldn't support them. I'd also say that a good autism organization is going to not only have autistic representation, but they are going to have a majority of board or decision makers being from the most marginalized members of our community. I think a good organization will make sure there's representation from autistic people of color, LGBTQ autistic people, and especially non-speaking or intellectually disabled autistic people. So I don't want to really name names, but you can kind of tell the parent-centered organizations generally aren't the ones I would support.
No, definitely. And that's such a huge thing, because I think as parents, we love our children fiercely and we want to protect them. But when we don't have that same lived experience, your intentions might be great, but you might be doing something that's actually ends up being harmful in the end. So kind of learning to quell your own ego as a parent, I think, and look towards people who actually have the same lived experience as your kid. I think that's a really good tip. And just as you're sitting there evaluating organizations yourself as a parent, that's really, really helpful. So thank you. Let's start talking about the positive side of things. In lieu of autism awareness, depending on how you're engaging with autism awareness, you might be doing it on top of autism awareness. There's also this kind of more positive movement called the Autism Acceptance Movement, or looking at April as Autism Acceptance Month. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about that and a little bit about how that movement is kind of rooted in our more recent history.
I know that on the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network's website, they say that acceptance is an action. I don't know if they came up with that or who came up with that, but I agree with it 100% that acceptance is an action. So it's not just saying you're aware of autism. It's not just statistics about how many people are autistic. It's doing the work to make the lives of autistic people better. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to become a big activist and protest. It just means treating, for parents, I think it means treating your children with respect and making sure that the world knows their value. As far as the history of autism acceptance, it began with grassroots activism. The person who came up with the whole idea of Autism Acceptance Month is an autistic person named Paula Durbin-Westby. And she was writing about and interviewing autistic adults back in 2010s and before that about their lives. And she wanted basically to teach people about autistic lives by having us speak for ourselves. And I was one of the people that she did interview back in the early days. I believe it was 2011 when she decided that April would be Autism Acceptance Month. And then later, the whole entire 2010s were the International Autism Acceptance Month decade. And it still continues to this day. So she did create the first Autism Acceptance Month campaign. And I think a lot of people are unaware of that history, but it was just a person who didn't have a lot of power or influence or money and just started it very grassroots way. And it really did catch on and a lot of autism organizations right now who are autistic led definitely prefer Autism Acceptance Month, definitely over awareness. And I think in the earlier days, there was a lot of pushback. And I remember when I even did an event on Autism Acceptance Month. I did it in collaboration with a parent organization, and they sent all my flyers back to me with acceptance crossed out and awareness put in.
Oh my gosh, you're kidding me.
Yeah, so there was a lot of pushback, but now, in the state I live in, Washington State, a lot of people don't know this, but the governor always declares April Autism Acceptance Month. And I'm always sharing that declaration on social media or showing it to people who call it awareness, because it is acceptance month, especially in Washington State. It is anyway. And I think that unofficially it is everywhere. But I think the biggest thing about acceptance is that it really does need to be an action. It needs to be something that you practice every day and how you treat the autistic people in your lives. It's not just saying I accept autism, it's doing the work of unlearning and confronting ableism.
Absolutely. And for our listeners who have maybe, I don't know, if you probably have heard this term because you've listened to this podcast before, but if you've never heard the term ableism, you know what? Is it okay if I ask you to define this, Lei?
It's basically discrimination against people with disabilities or disabled people. Much like racism, it's not something that is extremely overt or that you always see, but it's extremely pervasive in our society. I've mentioned before, there's 4 institutions in the state where I live for people with developmental and intellectual disabilities, and they're segregated from their communities, people don't see it as a problem. And I mean, that's just one example, and that is actually kind of a more overt example. But I would say even, the way that when my child started school, it was immediately accepted by the school district that they would be put in a behavior program and they would be separate from their peers because they had a disability. It's not just calling people like a slur, like the R word. It's very much like ingrained in all of our thought process, and it's something that we need to unlearn about the way that we value and view autistic or disabled people's lives. Ties in also with like autism acceptance, I think, is that there are some things that I will never be able to do, and that's okay. And that's like a big part of ableism too. Like, I'm an autistic adult. I can't drive. I have driven, and it's not good for anybody when I drive. But it's something that I've always felt like I should be able to do, but I can't. And it's only been in the last like 5 or 6 years that I said, there's nothing wrong with me because I can't do this. I'm disabled. And I mean, all it means is this is something that I can't do. And I can find workarounds. I can walk. I can, when it's not COVID, take public transportation. Yeah. So I think it's really important, especially with autistic people, because there's this perception that autism is not actually a disability when it is. And there's like a lot of pressure on autistic kids to do things that they might not be capable of. They might do it a different way. They might never do it. And that's okay. And I think that's like really important. Just, some people are different. Some people will, like, I will never probably be able to drive. I'm pretty sure that it's like set right now that it's not going to happen for me, but like, that's okay. And I think that's a really important message to have, because when you talk about acceptance, a lot of people misinterpret it to mean like autism is a superpower, and that's kind of like the flip side of ableism, because there's benefits to being autistic, but it's also a disability. And it also, like, there's hardships and there's things that are difficult, not because of who I am, but because of the way that society is structured for anybody who doesn't fit a certain type.
We know about Light It Up Blue is a big thing, right? I've also seen in some communities this Red Instead movement. And I'm wondering if you might know a little bit about that, and kind of tell us about why that exists or how to engage with it.
So Red Instead was founded by a Canadian autistic person named Alana Rose Whitney, and it was just kind of an answer to harmful like rhetoric of autism awareness and Autism Speaks Light It Up Blue campaign. So a lot of people do celebrate Red Instead. And there's actually other autistic-led initiatives, like one is Color the World for Autism that I've heard of. And my favorite is actually started by a group of autistic adults and founded by an autistic person of color, and it's called Tone It Down Taupe. And it's kind of a satirical response to autism awareness and Light It Up Blue. They actually like not only create really funny content that's speaking back to autism awareness, but they also fundraise. And I believe that they've given out more AAC devices to autistic adults in need than Autism Speaks ever has. I also kind of did my own sort of parody of autism awareness, and it's a Facebook page called The Neurotypical Wife. And my idea was like, what if I talked about my adult spouse who is mostly neurotypical, but for the purposes of the page is neurotypical? Like people talk about their kids on the internet. So I have a lot of posts about look beyond the normal and see the person inside. So, and autistic people are really funny. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. There's a lot of responses, I think, to Light It Up Blue by our community that are really worthwhile and worth checking out, I think.
No, for sure. I'm going to be checking those out. I'm already like amused by some of the wordplay. Now, your library is an amazing resource. You have some national acclaim for it. If there are parents who maybe aren't hyperlocal out in Washington State, are there ways that they can interact with it or access it, maybe even interact with the larger spirit of it, I suppose?
My website content is free to download for anyone. I try to update it as much as possible, but it's just me doing it right now. And because I want to keep it accessible, I don't charge for that. And for like, the PDFs and the little narwhal infographics that I make. I've started to record some of the events that I have with my community resource center. And I actually just recorded an event with Emma Vandercliff, who wrote Talk to Me, which is an amazing book. That is being edited and captioned at the moment. So I will put that on my website for everyone. And hopefully I can do that every month. So we're not a 501c3. We're like definitely more grassroots community based. So that does impact how many grants that I can apply for. So I generally don't have much money. So that is like a big barrier for me in like being able to like send books through the mail or outside of my community. The neurodivergent narwhals, I think, are kind of the way that I create content that anybody can access. The whole concept of that is just taking things like, if you say the neurodiversity paradigm, that's like a really big word. and it's confusing for people who are new to that information. And even with me, I'm hyperlexic, so I have to read things about 4 or 5 times before I actually can understand it. So the narwhals, I'm trying to take information that's big ideas and breaking it down so it's like a little easier to understand. It's kind of like 101 level. So that's available for anyone on our website and on our Facebook page. But another thing is that I'm not the only neurodiversity library. I was the first one, but there are a couple. I know there's one in India now, and there's in Australia, there's Neurodiversity Connect. There's a couple. Paperboat Autism Library is in, I think, Hattiesburg, Mississippi. There's McDonald Autistic Pride Library, and that's in Boston. NCW Lend is in Washington State, but it's in Central Washington. It's in Wenatchee. And there's Nova Autistic Pride Library, which is in Northern Virginia. And I do run a Facebook group for neurodiversity librarians. So if anyone would be interested in starting one, or finding out how other people do it, because I do it my way, but there's really so many ways you can have a neurodiversity library. Some people just like buy books and donate them to their local library. And, you know, some people do like play groups and bring their books there. But so there's lots of ways you can do it where it's accessible for anyone. I did send a list of links to you also of just some things that I think are really good resources that anybody can access. My favorite one at the moment is New Jersey Autism Center of Excellence. It's online and they have a series of webinars that are free to watch. And they have some amazing webinars. They had one with Alfie Cohn, who's like one of my personal heroes. And it's all about, mostly related to like the neuroscience of autism, but they just have so much great content out there and it's completely free. And another favorite of mine is Foundations for Divergent Minds, which is run by autistic people. And it's just teaching parents and people who are non-autistic, basically, how to do therapy right, basically. Autism and Neurodiversity in the Classroom is a Facebook page that's really good, and anyone can access their content. So I have a lot, but Autistic Typing on Facebook has a series of like, it's little infographics called Autism Moon. And it's as if like, instead of honeymoon, it's your autism moon. It's when your child is first diagnosed. Just, it's so beautiful. And I really think that any parent of an autistic kid can be so helped by that information. So I really recommend that too. So those are like all free resources that anybody can access.
And guys, you'll be able to find all of these resources, and we'll link out to all of the libraries and everything as well in the show notes. Thank you so much to you, Lei, for providing them. Because I feel like when your child is diagnosed, everything, all of the information that you receive is hyper like medical model information, like that 100-day kid or whatever. Like it doesn't go through the societal model of disability. It doesn't go through acceptance. I mean, it doesn't even go into like ways that you need to manage your finances when you're interacting with different social programs, which is part of why we started this podcast. So it sounds like a lot of this is going to be really good supplemental information for parents to access that you're probably not going to get just from your doctor or from your Medicaid program or however you're being introduced to autism off the bat. So I really appreciate that. And we talked a little bit about the term neurodiversity in there. For parents, again, who just have not been exposed to that type of language, if I could ask you to define it a little bit.
So neurodiversity is literally just the diversity of human brains and minds. It's a fact. It's a basic biological fact that we exist. And it's a neutral word that means a very specific thing, but some people put value onto it. I definitely put a positive value onto neurodiversity, but just the term itself is just very neutral. And that's just a word to describe the way that humans are diverse with brains. I think autism is definitely a form of neurodiversity, but it's not the only form of neurodivergence. So there's a lot of conflating autism and neurodiversity as meaning the same thing, and that's not true at all. Autistic people are neurodivergent, but so are people with anxiety disorders, ADHD, Down syndrome, learning disabilities, psychiatric disability. These are all neurodivergent brains. So if you have a brain that doesn't work the way that society expects it to, then you're neurodivergent. And I definitely think that neurodiversity is a good and positive thing. And it doesn't mean that it's not challenging sometimes to be neurodivergent. It can be difficult, but it can also be beautiful. And I think it should be celebrated like any other kind of diversity. And I think that the confusion with like the term neurodiversity is people confuse it with the neurodiversity movement or the neurodiversity paradigm. And those are different. They're based on like ways we think about neurodiversity. So the neurodiversity movement would be kind of like a civil rights movement to create a like more equitable world for people who are neurodivergent. And the neurodiversity paradigm is just a way of looking at neurodiversity that says it's good, it's valuable, and it rejects the medical model of disability and the pathology paradigm. It's just really simple. It's just diversity of brains and minds.
Autism is definitely a part of it, but it's not the only part. So it's not just like if you're not autistic, you're neurotypical. That's not necessarily true. It's a wide spectrum.
When it comes to my opinion, of course, with certain parents, the social media sometimes can be your worst enemy. Like if you go, they join groups and these groups are just targeted. And it's just, that's when you see like the misinformation. And I think sometimes social media also is not always your, like the best resource when it comes to us parents.
Yeah. Like for me, I actually never joined any like autism parent groups. I was like, that's not like something I need to do. But when we started this podcast, I started looking at some of them and I went into them and it's scary. Yeah, I totally agree with you. Like the parent-based groups can be very, very harmful, at least. And then at the same time, I have learned so much from social media. Like, I don't know that I ever would have known to reach out to Marenike or to Sam over at the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network or to you, Lee, if it weren't for all of your guys' work in the social media space. So I think it's kind of like a double-edged sword. There's some real just inappropriate stuff happening in some of these social spaces. So I think it's really just about finding the ones that, kind of going back to what you were saying, Lee, where you're following people who are leading from a place of experience rather than this place of ableism.
Yeah, well, like I think that I can't speak for all autistic people, obviously, but a lot of autistic people I know use social media to connect and find other people. Like that's actually, I met Marenike through social media before either one of us worked for AWN Network. And that was like one of the best connections of my life. Like I love her and she's like a great person to talk to about like parenting and who gets it because she has similar parenting style to me. And, you know, obviously like we have similar views on neurodiversity and things like that. So I've met like some really good people through social media, but I always say that I've been kicked out of the best parent support groups because I do get kicked out of them a lot because I will, you know, it's hard to like see something harmful and not say something. And I'm not a confrontational person for the most part, but if I do see something harmful, I will say something, and that's seen as not being supportive. But it's like, I'm supporting your child by telling you that this is hurting your child. And I'm also supporting, I think, parents in a way, because if you know something is harmful, then you won't do it anymore. And then your relationship with your child will be better. But that's my thing is I always tell people I've been kicked out of that group. So yeah.
I just don't think that social media, like Facebook, it's where you need to find what works for your child. You know, like that's not, you're not. I see it, I read it, I'm just like, I can't. I just can't. So for me, my personal opinion is, to me, social media for me is just not a good resource for parents. It might be, but for me personally, I didn't. How I Met You wasn't on social media, remember?
Yeah. As Autism Acceptance Month is coming, is there any actions that you would like to see? Like if parents were only going to engage and do one thing for Autism Acceptance Month, what would you like that thing to be? Or even if there's like a couple ideas you have.
I would think that the best thing that parents can do is to work with their children as their support but never their voice. I hear a lot of parents saying, I'm my child's voice, but you're not. Your child has their own voice, even if it's a non-speaking voice. They have their own voice. I feel that's really important to support your child, but to never speak for them and to help them be the best autistic person they can be. And I think you create the kind of world for your autistic child that they deserve by showing people how to treat autistic people by how you treat your children. I think a lot of times with parenting, we're also telling our kids what they should accept and what they shouldn't accept from other people and the way we treat them. Work with your kids, not against them and not like over them. That's like a big deal for me. I never want to be seen as my child's voice because they have their own voice. I think the number one thing that I did with my child was to teach them self-advocacy skills, to be non-compliant even when it's with me, because the world is telling them that they need to be like compliant a lot when you're autistic, and I don't want my child to accept that. When you're teaching self-advocacy, like no is a big thing, and I don't remember who said it, but they say that self-advocacy starts with no, and I absolutely believe that. And it's not always easy to have a kid who will say no to you a lot, but but it's worth it to me. Yeah, I guess just working with your kids is the biggest thing that I would want parents to do. I know like a lot of parents, when you talk about acceptance being in action, they're, we're already overwhelmed and have a lot of stuff to do. And like nobody wants to like do more, but it's really easy. Just the action is just being respectful to your child and supporting them to have their own voice.
For sure. Like one example of that I remember, we touched on some similar themes. You guys are just so awesome with Morenike. And one thing was like an example of a boundary and respecting that boundary. Morenike brought up hairbrushing. And I think that's a thing for like, it's not a thing for all of our kids, but I think that's a thing for a lot of our kids with like the sensory stuff. Yeah, we want to brush the hair and make sure that it's looking super great to like go out into the world. But if somebody doesn't want their hair brushed and they're comfortable going out in the world that way, and your kid tells you, no, I'm done, you need to stop. Like even just simple things like listening to that and respecting that no and respecting that boundary. That was one that stuck with me because that's something that we deal with in my house is hair brushing.
Yeah, I agree with that. Hair brushing I have a hard time remembering to brush my hair and I don't like how it feels. So I wear my hair up a lot so you can't tell. But yeah, I agree with that.
We always like to end these things by just straight up acknowledging we don't know what we don't know. So I'm wondering, Lei, if there's anything that we haven't asked you about today that you just think is really important for parents to know.
One thing that's important for autistic parents to know is that there are autistic adults who may not be exactly like their child, because that's a thing I hear a lot is you're not like my child. But I'm also like in my 40s. So of course I'm not like your 5-year-old, but I might have been like that when I was 5. There's a lot of wisdom, but also I would say that the autistic people you need to listen to the most are probably the autistic people that are saying things you don't want to hear or that are hard to hear. And I feel like it's really important to just like hold back your emotions on that and just listen, because the people that I have learned the most from as a parent are other autistic people who are telling me things that I don't want to hear, or maybe saying something that I was doing was harmful, and I listened. And even though it like kind of made me mad in the moment, because nobody wants to be told that they're doing something wrong or hurting their kid, it was actually the best advice I ever got. And it really changed the way that I parented my kid. And it was so helpful, and I'm forever grateful. And I don't think I sent you this link, but I can send it to you. But the autistic person who helped me the most when I was first starting out, like with parenting and like changing, like kind of going on my respectful and gentle parenting journey, was radical neurodivergent speaking. And I ended up actually knowing the person who writes that blog. And she really did change my life. And she made my child's life better by telling me the things that I was doing that were harmful. So I think it's important that you listen to people, and that they may not always be right. In my case, the person who was telling me that I was wrong was right. But it's important to listen to things that are hard to hear, because if you're a non-autistic parent, there's just things that you don't know and that you'll never know. But autistic adults who have been there can like really truly help you if you want to listen.
Thank you so much, Lei. And thank you for taking the time out today to talk with us and share some of your experiences and just educate us on a lot of this stuff. Because again, I feel like this is something that we don't get the opportunity to learn very often. And at the same time, it's one of the most important things for us to know. So just super appreciate you. Make sure you check out the show notes today, guys, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
So thank you so much to Lei for coming on and telling us a little bit more about that history and kind of for informing us about some other groups that are doing some really exciting stuff this month. I hope you guys will share this episode. It's going to be super relevant, not just for yourself and fellow parents with kids on the spectrum, but also this upcoming month, especially. I feel like a lot of members of our community and like our friends and people in our social groups, they really want to be there to learn more and support us. So definitely feel free to share this episode if you found it educational on whatever podcast listening platform you are using, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Subscribe, leave reviews. You can also check us out and subscribe to our email list at momautismmoney.com. See you guys next week.
Bye.